About a decade ago, a collector asked me to duplicate his screen-used 7th Doctor TARDIS Door Key, and in this video I'll not only show you how I replicated it, and it's embarrassingly easy by the way, but I'll also give you a little potted history on how the original prop came about. Stick around and you might just learn something new. First, before we begin, a little bit of housekeeping for you. While it's patently obvious that I do have moulds to this key prop, I do want to make it abundantly clear that I'm not selling copies of it at all, so I regret to say it, but please don't ask me because I'll only have to say no, so thank you in advance for that. Secondly, Mike Tucker, the original maker of the BBC prop, has asked me to point out that when he made this key all those years ago, it was a really quick build and he didn't really have any idea as to what he was doing, as he was just making it up as he went along. However, he did say to me that if he were to approach this project today, then he'd tackle it quite differently and take far greater care with its construction. Right, now that's out of the way, let's get on with it. In 1988, during the production of The Greatest Show in the Galaxy, a young Mike Tucker, who had only been working at the BBC's visual effects department for a couple of years by this point, was charged with making a number of props and models for this adventure. One of those props was a set of double-faced coins that actor T.P. McKenna's character, Captain Cook, used to cheat his way out of an untimely demise. Whilst making those props, Mike took it upon himself to work in secret and come up with a brand new design of TARDIS Door Key to replace the common Yale type that was currently in use. The idea was to hark back to the spade version as used by John Pertwee and Tom Baker in the mid-1970s. Mike made a pattern master from styrene plastic, which was then moulded in silicone rubber, and duplicates were cast in grey tinted polyester resin. He made just 6 castings. Of those 6, 2 were discarded due to too many imperfections, and the remaining 4 were taken forward and processed. 3 of these were given a hand-engraved star system on the rear, as a nod to the earlier prop that was used by the 3rd and 4th Doctor, while the 4th was left blank. As a result of this technique, each was suitably different. 2 had 6 stars and were slight variations of one another, whilst the 3rd had 7 stars. At first, Mike was reticent to show his creations to series producer John Nathan Tanner, for fear of revealing his true nature as a fanboy and risking his job on the programme. However, during the location shoot of The Greatest Show in the Galaxy, he took the plunge and presented them to John. He needn't have worried though, John absolutely loved the design and wanted to use them. So the following year, in what turned out to be the final season of the classic series of Doctor Who, the new key design was introduced. It appeared twice. First during a dimly lit sequence in Ghostlight, and then in a wide tracking shot at the start of Survival, and in both cases it was a blink and you miss it moment, in fact you could barely see them at all. Because of this, it's almost impossible to determine which of the 3 final keys were used where, save for the one in Survival. During the filming of that story, Sylvester McCoy attempted to insert the key into the TARDIS lock as part of the sequence and managed to chip off a corner of the central blade, giving that key a unique identifier. Fans wouldn't get to see what the key actually looked like until a couple of years after the show had ended, when Doctor Who magazine published a photograph of it, suggesting that BBC Worldwide had considered releasing it as an official piece of Doctor Who memorabilia. Alas, nothing came of this. I asked Mike about this, but he says that he knows nothing about it. Over the course of the next 2 decades, the original props would eventually find their way out into the wild and began to circulate within fan collector circles. One such collector wanted their key duplicated for insurance reasons. While the original could be safely stored away under lock and key, an identical duplicate could be substituted and left out on display for their enjoyment and appreciation. And so this is where I came in. It was my job to make this happen. I'd just like to take a quick moment of your time here to say a massive thank you to all these people without whom this video would not be possible. You'll notice that some of them are generous Patreon supporters. People like these help to keep this channel going, and if you want to contribute as well, then please do find your way over to my supporters page, where no matter what size your donation is, you'll always have my eternal gratitude. Having plucked up the courage to even start this project after my initial reluctance, I first clayed up the fragile resin original and built a containment box around it. Then, just like Mike, I took a silicone mould and was careful to capture all the details, including all the casting defects. I have to say, this was one of the most nerve-wracking experiences of my entire life. Should something have gone wrong, then I would have destroyed several £1,000s worth of original television memorabilia, so I was extremely careful and really took my time over this. While Mike cast his out in grey polyester resin, I elected to cast mine in black polyurethane to distinguish it from the original, but otherwise I followed Mike's process closely and to the letter. Back when I did this, I too cast out 6 copies and only worked on 4, but this was mainly down to timing reasons. The blanks were gently eased from the mould and carefully trimmed to remove any flashing. I then flat sanded the reverse in readiness for the star constellation to be added by hand. To maximise accuracy, I first took a photograph of the rear side of the key. Then in Photoshop I scaled it to the correct size, printed it out, trimmed it as closely as I needed to, and then with a glue stick I lightly tacked it down so that I could use this as a template to mark the position of the stars. Next I used my wife's lightweight and very manly drill driver to make a series of shallow countersink holes in the appropriate places where indicated by the template. Then with an engraving tool, I scored all the connective lines between the stars, whilst constantly referring back to my references to ensure that I wasn't going astray and that everything was in the correct orientation. Once all that was done and I was happy, I could now move on to the final stage, the colouring and the weathering phase. I bet you're jealous of my spray booth. Links down in the description, possibly affiliate with Amazon, who knows. After a light coating of primer, I turned to grate polish to give the key its metallic finish. Back in 1988, Mike actually used zebrite for this effect, but that went out of production years ago and so Stovax is the next best thing, as it's pretty much identical, it's just a wax paste with graphite powder mixed in. An interesting property of grate polish is that it reflects light differently depending on the conditions. In harsh light, the key looks a bright silver, while in low light it appears grey, and in some cases black, and it's down to this that there's been much discussion over the years in fan circles as to its true colour. Well, now you know. Technically, it's dark metallic grey. The polish was applied with a brush and worked into all the detailed crevices for full coverage. Then with a rag, it was buffed and polished to bring up the shine. Finally, for the weathering, I fell back on an old favourite, black acrylic paint knocked back slightly with a touch of brown. Once added and wiped back, this wash would then sit in all the low spots and add definition to make the raised details stand out and pop. And that was it. The last step was to add the correct chain and the key was finished. As I said at the start, this was a very simple process to perform. Just as a side note, in 2015 during the recording of The Girl Who Lived, I personally gifted one of these keys to Peter Capaldi and he absolutely loved it. For those of you who are into your trivia, Peter actually has this key in his coat pocket throughout this sequence, so technically speaking, the 12th Doctor has the 7th Doctor's TARDIS Door Key on his person during this story. And that's your lot. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. Also, please do hit that notification bell too so you're always informed when I upload something new. And while I've got you here, why not check out one of these videos as well, as it really helps the channel out. So on that note, thanks very much for your company, and I'll speak to you again soon.